Palestine. So as it's up to you guys to define that, but also on us as a community to support whatever you guys want to do and find ways that we can help you guys. So that's just what I want to say about a little bit about BDS boycott, especially in our own community, because this is what we're seeing right now in this past week. So we all need to be, whether you go to case, whether you don't go to case, we should all be supporting them right now as the administration, as the president comes at them. And it's up to us to kind of watch each other's back.
Thank you.
Yep.
Well, I want to hit Terry a softball here, but Terry, if you'd give me the opportunity, I just want to cue it up. Because Ohio's situation is a little different than some of these. You heard in the movie, and it was a great movie, by the way. Wasn't it a great movie? You heard in the movie that a number of the number of these things went through state legislatures without much fuss. That wasn't the case in Ohio. We made a lot of fuss. There were a lot of us who testified in both the House and the Senate and objected to the governor's office. Of course, it didn't do any good. And a couple of things I want to say about this. First of all, in Ohio, there were some Zionist organizations right here in Cleveland that took members of the House and Senate on all expense paid trips to Israel to queue this up. It was bipartisan. It passed overwhelmingly. And you may or may not have heard of a group called the Negev Foundation. They took the House members, they took 13 of them on an all expense paid junket to Israel in 2015 to queue this up. The Speaker of the House was in, what was Rosenberg's first name? Terry? Terry can hear me. Anyway, the Speaker of the House at that time actually addressed the Israeli Knesset about BDS, and we talked about that. So Ohio's law had a lot of money behind it. The Negev Foundation is what I call a Zionist money laundry. It's a 501c3 technically, but it doesn't act like a 501c3, but it has all the protections of a 501c3. But it certainly does its share of lobbying, and what it does, it takes excess Zionist money and just kind of channels it a little bit differently. You know, this Zionist hydra with money, it's like something you've never seen. It makes the syndicate look pretty tame, actually, and this is one of those branches of it. But I want to say that because Ohio's situation was different than some of the states that you saw in the movie. And you also saw the rabbi in Arkansas basically say, well, this really isn't a good thing. That wasn't the case in Ohio either. You know, the rabbis came out firmly in favor of House Bill 476 in Ohio, and it was quite disgusting. There's a question there. A charity, nonprofit, they don't pay tax. It's tax exempt. But that also means that they're not allowed to do political things, except that they do political things. Go ahead.
They took them again to Israel right before the election now, because I saw a lot of the politicians posting their pictures in Israel. Right.
Was that the Negev or was that the Adler Foundation? Because there's a couple of them in the Cleveland area that did. Yeah, the Adler Foundation just took a big contingent too. And the Adler Foundation, which is run through Federation, that's another one.
Yeah,
I mean,
maybe that was the one.
they just took a big group a few months ago too. But anyway, so I wanted to say that Also keep in mind that, yes, we absolutely need to support Case, because Case is kind of a special case, no pun intended, in Ohio, and because of Hillel, which is another mess when it comes to Zionist money. But Case is not a public university, it is a private university. So the law sees Case differently than it would Cleveland State. One more thing here, and then I'm going to cue Terry up. During Ohio's BDS fight, it was introduced by Kirk Schuring, who actually was then and is again the state senator from the area where I live. That was back when he was in the House. But my representative in the House at that time, his name was Stephen Slesnick, and Stephen Slesnick used to be my day camper many years ago. He was one of my mom's nursery school students. So I sent Stephen a little note about House Bill 476, and he wrote me back this. I'm just reading it to you directly. I've shared this publicly before. Hey, Eric, I believe this is Kirk's bill. I will support the Jewish community in what it asks me to do. Do you have an issue with this? If so, please let me know. I hope all is well and we will speak soon. And of course, we did speak soon. But the point is, he wasn't really particularly wedded to the bill either, but it's whatever the Jewish community wants, they get. And I think that a lot of legislators did that because the financial piece is important. Yeah.
That's in 2016.
Yeah, 2016. Yeah, this email was 4/21/2016. So go ahead.
But the movie displayed Israeli funds to civil rights bodies. Are there Israeli funds to political campaigns? And if so, can that be used for BDS in the court? Clearly, there will be a bias, wouldn't there? I would say, the question is, and help me if I get this wrong, but the first part of the question is there Israeli money in these campaigns? Political campaigns, and I would say yes. Is that public, and could that be used in the court?
Could you find it?
Probably not in the court, but Terry would be the one to answer that. But these Israel lobby organizations, they don't represent Jews. They represent the state of Israel in the Congress and in states. They do it through PACs, political action committees. So all of the activity of the political action committees is recorded. So yes, you can find it that way. But since Citizens United, the Supreme Court ruling of not too long ago, we don't always know the source of the money. But as the movie pointed out, I'm certain that there's money coming from the Israeli government. The one last thing I want to say before I cue Terry up here is Cleveland State being a state school is a better place to find activism for the purpose of taking down Ohio's BDS law. And in fact, we actually did try, 6 months ago? Yeah. And the problem was students are intimidated. I mean, can we just say that out loud? Students are intimidated. We all get it. We all understand. But if Ohio's law is going to fall, we're going to need to find plaintiffs who are going to be willing to stand up. And state schools like Cleveland State are the perfect place to find them. And that's kind of where I want to bring in Terry. I'll answer that question though.
Yeah, I just have a question. I noticed in the film that they had to sign something.
Yeah.
That, okay, but in Ohio, does that come across when you have a work?
We'll let Terry talk about that.
Okay.
Thank you.
So explain to me what the question is from the last person that was asking.
About in the contracts, the signing.
Yeah.
Yes.
In Ohio.
The way the Ohio scheme works is that if you are receiving any state benefit, payment or benefit, that you are required, and this I think is not being very consistently enforced yet from what we can tell, but in any event, there actually is in most state form contracts that are overseen by the State Department of Administrative Services as to their wording. The boilerplate wording literally does include a very short paragraph that states that you are certifying that you are not in any way supporting or participating in an economic boycott of the state of Israel. And it's that is how it is set up to work in other states also. The difference in Ohio is that unlike the other states that are depicted in the documentary, there isn't a formalized, centralized blacklist being maintained. The Texas, the woman, the tutor in the Texas school district, for instance, made it very clear that she would not sign the agreement as long as it had the wording in it. And that had the effect basically putting her on essentially a forever kind of blacklist for her refusal. So it's kind of problematic in Ohio because we haven't been able to find someone who has said that they flatly refuse to sign an agreement with a term like that in it. It really hasn't. I think the laws, we've talked about this a lot, Eric and I and others, the law is kind of on the books to pull out if there is an effective student movement in a state university, for instance, demanding that there be some sort of divestment of the university's portfolio of investments. So they have a law to trot out that says our hands are tied, kids, can't do anything about it. Sorry about your luck. But effectively, in the other states that this has gone down, there have been very overt instances. In Texas, after the, I don't know if anyone remembers the hurricane about 4 or 5 years ago that dropped 30 inches or so on the greater Houston area and wreaked just incredible disaster. As a condition for people to receive state aid to, in the form of low interest loans or other benefits to try to surmount what losses they'd experienced in the hurricane, they actually had to sign an agreement containing that kind of wording. And that became public because here are people in crisis and you're actually coercing them into some sort of loyalty oath to Israel. And boy, is that ridiculous. But here in Ohio, for instance, from what I can tell, the Public Defender Commission, which provides some funding for court-appointed legal defense of poor indigent criminal defendants, the Public Defender Commission is basically, from what I am understanding, has just said, we aren't going to include a term like that in the contracts that our attorneys have to sign. And the state hasn't landed on them about it. So some people are standing up and doing the right thing and achieving some pushback result, which also unfortunately has the effect of leaving us having to still search around for plaintiffs. So it's kind of a passive law on the books that can be trotted out for the convenience of Zionist supporting activities. But, it's a little bit elusive here. I also want to point out, just in every one of the cases that you saw, I think even in Arkansas, after the plaintiffs were successful, the state legislatures met and rewrote the anti-BDS statutes so as to declassify, basically make it so that the plaintiffs in those lawsuits no longer had standing. Like in Texas, the Texas legislature effectively made the case moot because they rewrote the law to say that tutors and other special contracts of school boards were no longer covered by the law. So the idea is that they still maintain on the books this prohibition, but for other classes except the individual plaintiffs who were filing the lawsuits. Same thing happened in Kansas. So that's still very alive. In 2018, in fact, we're coming up on about the 4th anniversary. There were 17 or 19 US senators who proposed legislation that would have made opposition to Israel in the form of boycott activity, nonviolent economic opposition, would be punishable criminally with up to 20 years in prison and a $50,000 fine. And I mean, it's absurd. What was more troubling is that for a few weeks, while it was pending before free speech groups got enough publicity and caused embarrassment, it was actually being talked about seriously. And I mean, and unironically, where no one was noticing the fact that isn't this just a curtailment of free speech? Is this really America? So there are some really amazing overreaching elements in the Zionist community in this country. And they have a very strong hold, although maybe it is possible that it is waning and that in effect, they are in a slow retreat.
I wanted to answer Anne's question over there. I have a similar job to the lady, Ahia, she's a speech therapist, right? And she's contracted out to other schools. I'm a TESOL teacher and I'm contracted to other schools. And I read my contract word for word, very carefully, made sure that law or that was not being enforced. I did not see anything about anti-BDS law in my contract, but I wonder if, like Terry was saying, that some places decide to enforce this and some don't. So that's just my personal experience. I didn't see it in my contract. Oh, sorry, Don, did you have a question?
Very
That slide I just showed, Terry, I showed the language, which appeared on page 12 of the Ohio contract. So I took that to some of the Arabic store owners to show them, in case they see that they can, if they do say, hey, we're not gonna sign it, we can have a lawsuit. So if anybody knows anybody who signs those contracts, you know, it's on page 12. On the bottom.
What contract?
And these are people who sell lottery tickets or accept food stamps. You know, it's a state contract.
What is this?
And they should get that. They should get that
Contract for what service?
on page 12.
Well, let me explain what basically when the state wants to procure property, new computers for an agency or buy large amounts of food for the prison system or something like that. Different departments have a somewhat different format, but all of them have required boilerplate provisions, which incidentally, ironically say things like, you know, a condition of this contract is that you're not using slave labor, you're not, you know, discriminating against people based upon religion, color, et cetera, et cetera. Oh yes, and incidentally, you promise not to boycott the state of Israel. So there's like a boilerplate segment. So the contracts may differ in length, but they all ultimately have a section which contains all of these boilerplate terms about billing and that you'll allow auditing. And I mean, just sort of a lot of legalistic stuff. And that's what is sort of troubling about this, is that this provision is buried in the fine print. as to the one person's comment about her own experience, I have to believe that there are some lawyers in the state who've been advising their public government clients, just don't include the wording. Do we want an embarrassing lawsuit that we're going to lose? You know, there may actually be a certain effect going on where some people just have the good sense to avoid trouble, and so they delete or refuse to include that term in their contractual arrangements.
Thank you, Terry. I'm gonna pass the mic to our moderator, Fatima.
Okay, this is another question, and we're just wondering, who can we boycott to prevent funding to Israel? I know there's really big companies. Well, I just learned this from the documentary. I'm guessing HP is a really big supporter of Israel because I literally have a laptop, so I have to throw it away now.
So some of the companies that you could boycott, and this isn't just on campus, it's in our communities as well, that we see are Sabra Hummus. That's an easy one. Motorola. Some of these companies directly fund the Israeli military, the occupation forces. Caterpillar is another one. They might do a lot of construction on your campuses. For those that might shop like at for Middle Eastern products, SADAF, SADAF, they try to pose as an Arab, authentic Arab ingredients, spices, things like that, but really in essence they are Israeli. And so you could really just go to the BDS website. SodaStream is another one, but the BDS website has a whole list of products that you could see. So if it is hard to avoid 100%, but try and focus on some of the ones that you feel like you could find reasonable alternatives to. No one's going to tell you to like boycott water, but if it is something like buying SADAF products, there's also Zayed products. There's also so many other spices that you can buy, for example. So I would definitely just recommend going online to the BDS website and just trying to find, yes.
Speaking of water, avoid Nestle, right?
That is,
Nestle water?
yeah. So, sorry, maybe you guys will have to avoid just a little bit of water, but, question?
So a lot of this is, one thing earlier is that the students aren't willing to stand up and fear, but part of that fear is also a lack of community support. If you knew you had backing and support, you wouldn't feel alone in this effort. And so that leads to growing that movement or information campaign, right? So helping others understand why this is important, why this is a fundamental rights issue, why this is a problem that we allow this to happen. So through all of that, are there lessons that are learned on Case's campus that could be applied to other universities and by other students to help make that process of going through the future?
Yeah, so I think that first of all, I want to thank you for your question, because I think community support as well as like student driven actions are very important. Me myself, I was a student organizer, so it is something that I feel passionate about. I think that looking at the resolution that Case put out is one really good example. That is a lesson that we kind of need to mimic. The same way that these Zionist organizations put out the same like boilerplate language. We have the Palestine movement here as well as back in Palestine has all the facts, all the moral superiority to appeal to people so people can understand us. When you explain what's going on in Palestine, anybody with a conscience is never going to look at you and be like, well, sorry, I'm going to have to support the other side. Because I believe that no matter what, if you present those facts to any reasonable human looking at things objectively, they will understand you and they will say that this is wrong. So I looked at the case resolution. They use facts. Israel has occupied the West Bank and Gaza since 1967, as well as Jerusalem. They are in violation of the Fourth Geneva Conventions, things like that, things that are grounded in an international law perspective, where when you look at resolutions like that, you cannot argue the facts with it. And using case studies such as South Africa, as well as putting those in the resolution. And if anybody wants to see the resolution, I could talk to me after. I can send you a link where you can have the email template and you can also take action. But I also think that, like, in terms of what is our community also doing in the background for those students as well is like an important lesson that we have to take away. How are we disseminating the information that's going on? Do people know about it? Do people not know about it? How are we talking about this when it does come up? I think you had a follow-up question and then.
Yeah, the resolution in itself, in my head, I've been for a while, that it's a byproduct of something. It's not the first step. Right?
Yes.
The first step is really, what is the information campaign being done? At least that case, there's community events that are held on campus, open broadly, advertised broadly, not only for students, but for others, to educate.
Yes.
To inform, and again, I'm not aware that CSU that's happening. Is that a tactic that felt used, but the most beneficial approach? Are there other approaches to educate, engage, and involve students broadly as well as the community? I guess that's more of a tactical question than one that what works.
Yeah.
Could you repeat the question or paraphrase it?
Like, what are the efforts that are being made to educate?
So what are the efforts that are being used on campus and in the community to kind of educate people on this issue?
Is that
I would say from cases example, what
From-
worked.
Okay.
Get that resolution back. Are there things that could be leveraged by others?
Yeah.
It's worked before. Let's try that again to see if that helps. That itself.
So I think I don't go to case, so I can't speak directly. I can only speak about my experience at Kent State. But some of the things that we use on campus, and I'll kind of reference case, is understanding that Palestine is not a singular issue. So when we talk about Palestine, it's a very relatable issue to a lot of communities. We saw it within South Africa. We also saw it in the movie with the Black Lives Matter movement. So understanding how you can make these connections on your campus with other organizations that are political, that are very human rights based and driven for social justice, I think is really important. How do you link with those and invite others who might not be inside your community specifically, whether it's Muslim, whether it's like Palestinian, Arab, etc. You have to invite others, whether it's a movie, whether it's just having a educational webinar, whether it's a culture night, things like that, I think are very important to kind of spread the word, because you have to understand, like, if it was our role as Palestinians and as those advocating for Palestine in the United States is not to just be a singular Palestinian movement, but to bring a broad coalition of support to the Palestinian cause. So hold on. You had your hand up, and then I'll go Dino, and then Cam, and then I'll have
Oh,
you.
wow.
I'm
Okay.
sorry. Did you also raise your hand as well? Okay,
We wanna, I just want to real quick tell you guys about, there are efforts that are being made in the community. It's starting to, I think what happened at Case and some other things that have happened recently are starting to wake up the community a bit and to try to organize more. One of those efforts, Chance and I belong to the Palestine Breakfast Club. And it's called, the Palestinian Breakfast Club, but everyone's invited. We're having the event on December 18th at 11 a.m. at the Beit Hanina Community Center on Lorraine Avenue. Basically just bring a dish and come and, we'll talk, we'll talk about what's going on, what we can do, and just be the support. I also want to say that the students in the community do have support. You have a care office right here, down the street from CSU. So we're one of your main supporters in your civil, and fighting for your civil rights. So, and I think it's important also to look at this not just as supporting Palestine, but also supporting the right to freedom of speech. Okay, the right to freedom of speech is not like the 10th Amendment in the Bill of Rights or the second. Okay, it's the first, and I think that's the number one issue here. Is as Americans, I mean, this core value is being suppressed, right? Our right here is being suppressed to support another country that has nothing to do with America. So I think that's number one issue that we need to talk about here. And anyone that's American, anyone that's like, anyone should be upset about this. So, but yeah, there are efforts being made, and I think, hopefully you'll see more efforts of strategic planning. And I'm sorry, I think somebody had a question. Anyone?
Guys,
Oh, okay.
one quick here.
The Case victory is a big deal. And it's a big deal because the Zionists in Cleveland think they own Case. And then you're laughing, but because we know it's true. But not only, I mean, not only do they think that they own Case, but actually through Hillel, which is, Hillel is, when I was a kid, Hillel was where Jewish kids on campus would go for Sabbath dinner. It's no longer like that. Hillel is Israel, and it's Israel lobby, and they're militant, and they are organized, and in the case of the Case campus, they're extraordinarily well funded. I mean, 7 figures annually, whatever they want.
Here's another thing about Hillel. Once a year, they go to Washington, the kids, to meet with all our leaders.
Yep, but Hillel's mission on these campuses, and Case is one of the strongest in the country. Hillel's mission on these campuses is to suppress anybody who says anything about Palestine.
President Taylor shot that down, right? The
We
letter
do.
came out the next day, so I worked there.
Yeah.
Saying that these students were naive, this is very stupid, that they had frivolous, I can't remember all the details, irrelevant things to it. And actually shot down any kind of conversation that could ever come out of that.
Of course.
With the state dialogue and other things, and a few tenured white professors, of course, came out to say, shame on you, why did you write this? But he got a lot of support on Twitter and by, from the faculty who paid homage to him for all these things. So I don't know what's going on, but I kind of wonder what kind of victory it is. When you just shot that down, so we're gonna ignore it, stupid.
Well, see, and that's where some work needs to be done, because part of the problem is that we don't have a ready answer. you can bet that when it passed, Hillel had a ready answer, and that's why the president did what the president did. Because, I mean, they have their alumni networks all ready to go. You know, when I'll say something out of the closet here, but I have a cousin, a third cousin actually, but who worked at Hillel's national office as Eric Fingerhut's personal assistant at the time when Hillel attacked the B'nai Keshet group at Ohio State University. B'nai Keshet was an LGBTQ Jewish group, completely non-political. I mean, this is the least political group you would ever see on a college campus. I mean, naively unpolitical. And all they did to get attacked by Hillel was they attended a soup kitchen organized by Jewish Voice for Peace of Central Ohio. That's it. Because Hillel has in its articles of participation very strict rules about who gets to be part of Hillel and who doesn't. And basically it's an Israel loyalty oath. So anyway, my cousin told me when that happened, within minutes, their office was alerted that there was an issue, and Eric Fingerhut was working the phone. And the president of Ohio State University was getting calls, not just from the Hillel people, but from alumni, big donors, alumni. There's nothing comparable to that in this room or for this cause. And that's part of the problem. So I'll just leave that there, but case is a big deal. And I would say it's not over yet. So go.
Can you go back to your question?
I have an last question, but this is to Terry. How far can Israel go in terms of the state's legislation? I mean, how much is it legal for Israel to support the state's legislation? Again, for
What's legal or illegal is a very good question.
Terry, did you hear the question?
we have.
Not very well, no.
Want to say it?
So I'm gonna paraphrase your question, if that's okay. I don't want to put words in. But the question is, how far can Israel go in the legislature of the state?
As far as money can buy, apparently.
That's exactly what I was saying.
That's the answer.
The thing is that as Eric was just describing, the means of pressuring and lobbying, there's a nice combination of tactics. When you have a lot of money and you have wealthy alums, for instance, that are basically saying, you know, I've been giving $100,000 a year. Maybe this December I'm going to think a little differently, unless you do something about that SJP chapter. That is some pretty sophisticated and evil pressure that is very, very difficult to match. They've already gone farther than just the BDS bill. Your current lieutenant governor and Josh, what's his face, that ran unsuccessfully for senator? Yes, Mandel, when he was a state legislator, and in about 2010 or 2012, hand-carried for the Zionist lobby, hand-carried legislation through that allowed a certain percentage of the 1%, I believe, at the time, of the basically the uncommitted cash reserves of the state to be invested in Israeli bonds. And part of the BDS House Bill 476 law in 2016 was to raise that 1% threshold to 2%. And also it is extended to all local governments that may want to invest in Israeli bonds, which are from a investment standpoint are a terribly risky kind of thing with an awful lot of problems in terms of being able to liquidate them. But so, and this, while I don't know of any other states that have adopted a similar kind of law, what you are talking about in practical terms is that the state of Ohio, and remember there's 88 county governments also, the state of Ohio is able to invest up to 2% of loose cash, which roughly ranges, from what I understand, around 30 million bucks at any given time. So the state of Ohio can invest 2% of that's the 2% number. They can invest up to a roughly $30 million in Israeli bonds. So money that could be invested in Ohio bonds or some other type of mechanism to cure an awful lot of the problems in this state instead is going to shore up the garrison state in the Middle East. It's incredible. And I mean, it's amazing when you think about it, because the way the law reads is that, you know, the state is hereby enabled to invest money, blah, 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 in any government, and then proceeds to say that the only government that is permissible and named, of course, is the government of Israel. So there's a lot of insidious stuff going on. And it's, I mean, that's kind of what's happening. And like I say, when you have endless money and creativity and levers to pull that are far out of our reach or range, that's what happens. I do want to make one comment. I think the Case student paper is absolutely splendid. They have run a columnist's critique of the resolution that was passed, but also did an official formal editorial, which is supportive and which points out the very fact-based, you know, the very rational case that was made for the resolution to pass. And wonderfully, and all too predictably, you have the president of the university talking as though it's his issue and he's personally offended and you're endangering people on campus and all the rest of it. And instantaneously abandoning the role of the university, which is to have these debates. I was in college during the Vietnam War, and you know, just to hear these puny arguments about people's feelings being hurt and how they might feel threatened and how, you know, how disruptive it can be is just crap. It's absolutely, it's offensive to me. This is what your university education is supposed to be about, is exchanging ideas and doing it peacefully if you can. And, you know, I'm sorry, I'll shut up, but basically it's monstrous for the president of a very influential university to be whining about the fact that, oh my God, people's feelings are going to be hurt and they'll feel coerced or unliked. My God, what's going on in the Middle East is what this is about. It's not what's going on in the campus of Case, where people are maybe get angry enough to yell or to disagree or even threaten fistfights. That's the way it is. Rough edges.
I just wanted to add to that question, or just answer. I think it's important. Okay, so yeah, Israel and the Zionists are going to do what they can, right, to get, you know, the laws that they want passed and enforced. But the question is, how far will you, as American citizens, go to defend your rights, to defend your democracy? And that includes, as you saw, one politician voted to pass this anti-BDS law and didn't even know what he was passing because he didn't read it until his constituents came up to him and said, hey, this was wrong. I can't believe you did this. Now he's starting to question, oh, maybe I shouldn't have done that, but now it's a little bit too late, right? So what you need to do, right, is register to vote, register your friends to vote, go to the polls, take whoever needs a ride, take them there to the polls. Go to your state legislators and lobby and or advocate for what you believe in. Okay, so it's not just what Israel will do to defend what they want. What are you going to do to defend your rights as an American? So that's what's really, really important, and that's what we need to do.
All right, we're gonna go back to the queue of the questions. Let's all just try. Let's ask the good questions, and then we'll try and keep our responses short so we can get through everybody. So let's go with Dino. If I can call you that.
Yeah, that's fine.
Oh, thank you.
And I also wanted to make a shameless plug and double down on Beth's announcement. If you are genuinely interested in the community organizing around this issue, I encourage you to attend that Palestinian Breakfast Club event. That's going to be a really insightful event for those of you that are interested. So my question is for Terry. Terry, can you describe what you feel would be an ideal plaintiff?
Did you hear that, Terry?
Yes, yeah, I did hear it. Thank you. An ideal plaintiff is someone who simply refuses, has had the loyalty oath put to them, has refused to sign. And like I say, it can be, I haven't been able to identify the actual contract that might be used in the case of food stamp redeeming grocery stores, now called the SNAP program, of course, or lottery ticket outlets, but I am sure that the law applies to them. In other words, you might find a carryout owner who doesn't realize that the form they signed has this clause in it, and if they reviewed it and realized that they had basically signed this oath to Israel, that perhaps they would feel differently once they realize the truth of what had happened. That would be one avenue. Another is, and we've explored this, haven't we, Don? Trying to perhaps rent space at a state university for an event, and hoping that they would include that kind of phraseology in the agreement for the rental, but they don't. It occurs to me, and I don't know if this would be the case, but every student who basically gets dormitory lodging in a state university has to sign an agreement at the outset of the year. I'm wondering if maybe there's even wording in the student manual or in whatever agreement you sign for lodging and board that might include that phraseology. It may well be that it isn't there for the reasons I've mentioned before, where you basically, the state university doesn't want to unnecessarily have a big embarrassing and losing lawsuit on their hands. But ideal plaintiff is someone who is principled, and they don't necessarily have to support BDS, but support the notion of freedom of speech and not having the state dictate your point of view in order to for you to have a benefit from the state. Perfect.
I think there's some people in front of you, but I'll add you to the queue. Let's go. Unless you.
I didn't have a question. I just wanted to respond to the point that you brought up earlier, because I was a student at Case from 2016 to 2020, and so I can give a little bit of like insight into what I see as sort of like laying a bit of the foundation of what happened. Like when I went into Case, I'm not Jewish, I'm not Palestinian, I didn't have any knowledge of this issue, and like after seeing development at the school, like I became incredibly aware of the situation, and what had happened was, this isn't the first time that the BDS proposal had been brought up to student council. It was brought up in 2018 as well. And when that happened, there was so much noise happening on campus, it was impossible to avoid. And I think that in large part plays the fact that Case is a very, very like the Zionist like faction on campus is very well funded. But while I was there, like there were leading advocates for it getting smeared like in public freshman lectures as being anti-Semitic, as being a virus on campus, and like these things were like filmed and shared to students on campus. There was an interaction between Case professor Steinberg with
Somebody recording him.
Yeah.
And then he threw his podium, I was there.
yeah, and like
We know Ted.
so, yeah, that is great, and, really, and then like in May 2021, when the uprising in Palestine went off, there was a student, at Case who was graduating, who was, being very critical of Israel on Twitter, and then, StopAntisemitism.org launched a campaign to try to get him fired from Cleveland Clinic, and he was someone who was very well known on campus, and so what I see is like, and like all of this is also had the like caveat that the initial attempt failed, but like what it did do is I felt it, and I feel like a lot of people who were on campus at that time, like through that like political struggle, like the consciousness of people on campus changed, and it was like really difficult to like, you couldn't avoid it. Like I was in a fraternity, and like my fraternity became like divided between like Zionists and anti-Zionists. So I mean, it really is a matter of like political struggle. Like I feel like it was the political struggle that like shifted the consciousness. And so, I mean, that is just like from my own experience, like the students who are at CSU, like if you want to see these sort of resolutions passed, I think it is gonna take like a political struggle, but that is also like, that is a serious risk and not something to take lightly. And so I just wanted to share my experiences with that. I think that is like the thing, like seeing how the Zionists respond. Like if you are a student and that gets filmed and it gets circulated on Instagram, like all of your fellow students are gonna be like, this is insane. I don't know anything about Israel or Palestine, but like, why is this like person from Hillel refusing to like say that Palestinians deserve to live? That doesn't make any sense. So
it seems like a combination of influencer, viral movements, help persuade people, right? So if you've got a presence of an individual who's already influencer, well known, and they learn and advocate for their collective circle, got a line, as well as some of the viral stuff we were talking about, which goes back to fact-based stuff. If we actually put that out there to market people with you, people are, you're putting them back on blast. It all just doesn't positive.
yeah, and really exposing like the thing that like I feel like really helped the movement on Case's campus is like exposing the powerful Zionists on campus and the way that they respond to very, very like basic things. Now you're at the point where the struggle is at the point of Case's campus where the president has to release this incredibly like embarrassing message. And like now all the students are seeing that as well. And so like that's the point I guess I'm trying to make is like this is like the struggle sort of like shapes consciousness, and it can bring people who otherwise would be like completely unaware like into it, like was the case for me. And so that's something to people who like, if that is taken up at CSU's campus, like people's consciousness will change as like they're being shown. And like, yeah, Instagram, social media, like all of that is like an important part to it.
Thank you for sharing that.
Are you gonna go 1, 2, 3?
I actually was going to basically address what you just mentioned, but based on your question. But I had gone to the university to see the professor, who is he's a former professor in Israel, and he's Jewish. And I think that itself helps a lot, because I've noticed if you are from the Middle East, I'm originally from Iran, or if you're Palestinian, they're like, oh, you're just for this because you're from this side of the world.
someone who is Jewish who speaks out, I think there's a different response. And I think people are like, oh, you're saying your quote unquote, your people, which is not, it's the Israeli government, really what they're saying. What they're doing is not really humane. And I think that's really important to have that exposure, have more Jewish people to come forward and speak. I know it's not easy. I'm not saying it's easy, but I think for myself, bringing someone like this gentleman who doesn't have any idea, I'm like, come and see, just get exposed. So if an American person who can bring a friend who may not know of what's going on and expose them to what is the reality of what Palestinians are going through. I think that's important. Conversation, exposure, even if it's graphic, I think it's important to see or hear what is on.
Yeah, especially.
Thank you. We're gonna go here and then there.
I think we're missing the bigger picture. In that the loss, this represents the loss of fundamental freedoms that make us supposedly a democracy, that make us supposedly a pluralistic modern country. These kinds of freedoms are taken for granted in what we call the free world, right? Western democracies. This is, we've grown up taking this for granted that we can express ourselves freely without fear of retribution in a public forum on political issues. And so I think if we keep this issue just to Palestine, we're doing this an inservice, an injustice. Boycott is enshrined in the labor movement, in many justice and human rights movements, in the fights for civil rights. We boycotted businesses that did not deal properly. These are things that we've always done in order to get rights. So guess what? As Palestine and Arab activists, those that are concerned with this issue, I think we need to reach out to the labor movement. We need to reach out to these other movements who have relied on boycott. For instance, we know that they're using the same boilerplate legislation now to go after the environmental movement. We need to have an event with the environmental movement to introduce this, to draw those comparisons, to make it clear to them that this is a loss of a right, not just to us, but to everyone. And so I think that's our next step. We need to reach out beyond the Palestine, the Arab communities, those who are interested in our issue. And we need to take this to the labor movement. We need to take this to the environmental movement and to the Black Lives Movement and so forth. And have a conference that draws these comparisons, right? So that they realize that this is a right they're taking away from them. It may not be today, but guess what? Tomorrow is going to come for them, for each one of them. And we have to make that clear. This will grow our movement. Understand? This will grow the movement to regain freedom of speech. And that's what we've lost here.
Yeah. Right. 100%.
Agreed.
Thank you, Jeff.
That's right. And I think he is also correct, because I know the Black Student Union was in on this bill that passed in case, and now they're looking, going, what is all this fuss? And now my student happens to be one of part of the executive board of the Black Student Union. And she's like, what's this? Why, we just asked them to investigate to see if there's anything that we're supporting. We didn't even ask them to divest, actually, and ask them to look into it, to see if there's anything. So and then of course it shot through the whole entire university, right? All the students are talking about it, because it's a big deal. So it does have that power of, making people just kind of look at something they normally wouldn't have thought of. But I think it's right, when you connect this to things that everybody, a lot of people support environmental issues and want the world to be a better place. And then, oh my gosh, this is gonna interfere with that too. Then people will stand up, just like they did in the election, when it was like, this is a democratic issue. This is democracy at stake, not just, then people started to wake up and vote and, make sure that people who were denying the election were out, right? Because we want to make sure we can have an election. So it became a broader issue than just Democratic and Republican, right? It became save the country, save democracy. So I think it's true. If you make boycotting save our right to speech, and democracy is based on that. If you've ever lived outside the US, you see how horrible it is when you can't speak freely or gather freely and things like that. So then people start to value these things and will fight for it. So I think that's a good point.
All right, so we have 2 more questions. We have 5 minutes left, so please. We're gonna keep our answers really brief, so go ahead.
Also consider liberal religions like in the movies of the Quakers and the Mennonites supported the BDS movement. Also, probably I could imagine the Unitarian Universalists. They're very open religion.
UCC.
UCC also, yes. Nine Methodists. Already actually in the state of Ohio, they passed about a year or 2 ago about protesting at critical infrastructure like oil refineries and stuff in terms of environmental issues. That protects those entities from having protesters on their property and near their properties. So it's already expanded, into the environmental, and in the movie you mentioned about in Texas, they stand with the law against boycotting the fuels and the army sellers. Definitely. I've experienced it myself in another totally issue, but there's an issue involving privatizing water treatment facilities in Milwaukee, and our union, with combined with Food and Water Watch and local environmental groups, and getting a coalition of groups to fight this is going to be a big help. So I encourage that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Last question.
I just thought we could read the First Amendment together. Can y'all hear me?
Yeah.
Because it talks about religion also, and I mean, there's 4 others in it, but I look at the Supreme Court and what they're going to do next. And how we got a bias appointments to put. I think there's something, Terry, that should be overturned about the appointments of the Supreme Court justices too. But the First Amendment is simply Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or of the press, or of the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. That's all it is. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think that's all the questions, right? Are there
Yeah.
any last statements you guys want to make?
2 minutes.
Well, I just wanted to say thank you to our moderator, Fatima. Sorry, we kind of just like. With so much, she's been great, she's been so patient, thank you for her coming here tonight on this cold day, probably has exams tomorrow or something. Terry, is there anything you wanted to say?
Simply thank you, and I'm very heartened and encouraged. This is a great discussion, and I'm especially energized by the fact that young people are really standing up and taking notice. This is wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, you all have a good night. There's some baklava. You guys want to take some and stay safe and stay warm. Thank you.
Yellow Slim, Terry.
Bye, Terry.
Thank you guys for coming.
Thank you for
And thanks for everybody's input.
For having us.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah.
Okay, and here's the information about the Palestine Breakfast Club.
Excuse me? The link is not working. Excuse me?
Oh, no.
Dino, what, the link isn't working? Let me see. It might be lowercase. Let me see. I'll send you the flyer, okay?
Yeah. Yeah, it was tough. And it's
Yeah, thank you. I'm good. Yeah, I hung out for 2 years and now we're all like we don't at our house. So, becoming more of a person again. Yeah, obviously, going out and meeting people and putting myself out there and a lot of people about this event and some people were gonna come out and they're like, oh, I can't. But a lot of people are interested for having people they needed to debate with us.
Hi,
I just want to say that you actually did a great job.
thank you.
Yeah,
I wish I could have done more.
No, you did good. You actually did a great job.
Thank you.
I also want to ask if you need any help with anything, with your car, to the.
I want to take that upstairs, like the road tower, but I don't know if it's open.
It might be locked. Usually, let MSA, like, if it's later in the, at night, probably did you call the CSU police?
I didn't.
We can come with you. I mean,
Yeah, I wouldn't mind if you guys came with me, but I just want to make sure if it's not, it's okay. I can put everything in my car. I'm just gonna put it in the upstairs in the MSA room.
yeah, okay. Yeah. By the way, I'm his brother.
I know.
Okay.
You're the ex-owner of the house. I thought that was funny. Well done. Yeah, I remember from last semester. Did you graduate? Oh, okay, then why weren't you on the board? Oh. Where did I go?
Thanks for coming out. Yeah, it was pretty good.